Good morning, everybody. Venkat, the forum is yours. You can start now.
In the next 60 minutes, I'll give you a broad outlay of how to understand international taxation. And that's very critical. And that's what we can do in an hour's time. Once you have these basics in your mind, then you can always use the tools and know how to open the law. That's the idea of this session for 60 minutes. I must really thank Honorable Justice Venkataraman, Srini, Hema, and everyone who is associated with this. And slightly emotional also that our Madurai Makkal are getting really educated. And the kind of response, one or two other lectures also I heard, I joined for a few lectures of what Srini was posting. The kind of participation, the interaction, and the enthusiasm amongst youngsters. So the vision which Honorable Justice wanted to actually create has happened. And thanks to whoever is involved in this project. And what you have shared is knowledge, which is a very, very superior form of gift. Says our scriptures, because any other gift if you give, we will lose it. The other person will gain it. Whereas in knowledge, even any amount of sharing, you are not going to be less resourceful. So that's the kind of job which you have done. And the enthusiasm has come more from the participations. Participants have done a wonderful job. My best wishes to all of you. So let's understand what is international taxation. See, right. Okay. Now, something is coming. Sorry, Shini, 1 minute.
No problem.
See, when you want to get into international taxation, these are 4 pillars which one should be familiar with. The first pillar is, why should somebody leave their country and come and do business with India? So what should India look to them? That's the beginning of a transaction of international trade. The second is, once that entity wants to do business with India, what are the types of structures one can think of? What is permissible in India is something which must be thought of. Now the third, in fact, we have to swap third and fourth. Treaty will be third, withholding will be fourth. The third will be, okay, India, US, India, Japan, India, Saudi Arabia. Whether these nations are governed by double taxation agreement between the governments? If so, have they conceived any special benefits for the type of business which you are going to do? So that it will be destination-based incentives, whether there is something like that, so can we go to that country? For which treaties play a role. And the fourth pillar is the withholding tax, because in international trade, see, suppose a company like Microsoft from US is doing some business in India and money is earned in India. So India would like to tax that transaction. And the question is whether India should tax it, US should tax it, which I will deal it a little later. So if India wants to tax it, then India can't wait for Microsoft to come and file a return and then pay. So it will say the payer in India should withhold taxes and remit it on behalf of Microsoft. So there's a withholding tax mechanism which will be part of the international taxation structure. So these 4 together form the 4 pillars of what we call it as international taxation. Now let us take the first pillar. Factors determining investment decisions. So if somebody wants to come to China or to India, or somebody wants to go to China and not come to India, what sort of an inducement will allow an investor to come to India? So he will look to these following 4 factors. The type of access he gets to get into India. He will find out the cost of production, whether it is of manageable level. Suppose his cost of production is going to be more than, say, New Zealand or Netherlands or London or America. Why should he come to India? They come to Asian nations only because we have skill sets with us, and we are not that cost prohibitive compared to the West. But who is our competitor? China will say, if India is, you are going to pay a laborer India 300 rupees, I'll manage it with 150 rupees, you come to me. So ultimately, an investor will look how optimal his cost of production can be. That's one factor which he'll have to bear it in mind. Then adequate raw material resources, skilled manpower, and foreign exchange. Ultimately you put money in a country. Of course, you allow the country to also grow, no doubt about it. But he will also want the money, the returns to come back to his native country. So he will be concerned how the foreign exchange regulations actually deal with this situation. So these 4 are very important in determining an investment. See, India, we can say with lot of pride, India is a safe and a huge destination base. We have, see, in spite of COVID, in spite of our debt to our GDP is all high, everything is there in the economic scenario. India sits on a huge foreign exchange reserves. We have $470 billion as our foreign exchange reserve. That's India's real strength. Now, foreign exchange reserve, how does it accumulate in India? The best route is FDI investment, people coming and investing in India. Then people investing in the stock market. Then are people exporting and earning foreign exchange and incentives and various other. These are the 3 verticals. There are about 5 other 6 subsidiary verticals also. Therefore, India is a very safe destination to do business. After globalization, after the world market opened in 1991, we started to progress very well. Now, second is the form and substance of the structure. So before somebody comes to put their money in India, after first filter is crossed, namely the skill sets, cost of production, foreign exchange, all, he will then decide what sort of a structure should we have it in India. Today, I'm not dealing it on inorganic. I'll confine only to organic. That's enough for the time being. So how does organic structure work in India? This is how it works. Now, all over the world, the best business practices suggest any one of the 3 to be done. It can be either through a joint venture. We'll go to the last. It can be either through a joint venture or through a branch or through a subsidiary. So what will he do first? He will not create an infrastructure straight away, unless otherwise he's a big brand. He will try to find out a partner in India and say that partnership can be mere contract. It can actually be a partnership itself or a joint venture. He will first test waters, because something goes wrong, he can always go back. So before making huge investments, or before trying to pitch himself, he will test the soil. So initially he will go for a joint venture proposal. If he finds something good, it is natural that he will convert the joint venture partner into a branch. He will say, you will have to now work for me. That's an attitude of an MNC. They will always want the brand and their identity to be retained, and everybody should align themselves into it. That's how they look at it as a business prospect. That's their nature. So he will convert a venture into a branch. And if he starts finding that that's working very well for him or her, then they will convert this into a subsidiary. So you will find so many multinationals having subsidiary companies in India. And we, as Indian entities, there are leading brands in India who are all Indian MNCs in other countries. We go and do the same thing in their country. There are leading brands in India which goes for international pitch. So it's both ways. Now, when you decide these models, how do you slowly graduate the model? These are all the factors. Control will always be with the investor. That's the order of the day. Anybody who puts money will have a control. It's natural. Then this is what is called the FAR. Functions, assets, and risks. So which country is good for what? For example, they have somehow found China to be good in manufacture and India to be good in services. This is a global thought. That's why governments are all pushing for an agenda, make in India. Because we have skilled resources, we have human capital in a very large number. And therefore, why not India become a manufacturing base? In fact, when we were doing a presentation yesterday, we find China is doing 4 trillion in manufacture. India is doing only $500 billion as on date. So post-COVID, if the geopolitical space allows India to progress and benefit out of China's loss of business for any reason, even if we get 10% to 15% of the business from China to India, India can become a 1 trillion economy as far as manufacturing is concerned. We are already a 2.2 trillion economy, but manufacture is contributing only 0.4%, 0.4 trillion. We can increase it to 1 trillion if post-COVID geopolitical sphere is going to encourage that to happen. So these are all the factors which keeps intergovernmental interaction, intergovernmental incentives, then partnership meets, business meets, global summit. Every state is doing every time. All of us would have been very familiar with so many things. Investment climate, all these factors, tax exposure, speed, cost. If you're going to be very, very prosaic and very procedural, they may not like to come. See, one of the reasons we brought into GST was only that. How could an investor be diverted to China? They'll come and say, everything is fine in India, no problem. But your last mile taxation, India is a federal country, China is not. China follows communism. Because it's a federal country, each state has got a right to tax. And therefore, each state will tax the same transaction at its own will and rates. So you will have 25 different compliances and 25 different rates in India. So why do you want to go to India? That's why for 25 years, this experiment has worked and become one nation, one market and one tax. So these are all the evolutions which we plan to ensure India sustains the globalization model. And today what we are doing post-COVID, we have gained enough experience for 30 years. We have our own products which can now go global. And therefore, we are re-engineering to say, we will make in India as much as possible and we will go global. And today, there is a need and an urgency because of post-COVID economic recovery that we are telling people, please buy those goods which you can afford, which is available in the local market. You can't buy a computer in a local market, but we can buy our regular essentials from a local. So go for a local brand, because the money should now stay with us. We need to recover slowly. So that's one indication that is happening as a change in the COVID situation. Now, we will now go to the third sections, which is this international treaty. What do you mean by a treaty? A treaty is one. What happens when two nations, its corporate houses, want to do business? Then every corporate house would like to know whether its government has a proper relationship with the other government. You enter and your country is held to be a hostile country by that government, then you have to hang yourself. It's like committing suicide. So businesses, international trade has to be regulated through government relationship. It is inevitable. There are international bodies governing it. There are international experts handling it to ensure that nations meet and nations converge and take business forward. So this is a commercial requirement. But it is not enough if it stops with a commercial requirement. You have to convert this commercial requirement into a law. Otherwise, how can this happen? How can nations regulate without a law? So what do? There are two provisions in the Constitution, one provision in the Constitution and one provision in the Income Tax Act, which we must be very familiar with. Article 253 allows the Parliament through the government to enter into treaty or agreement or convention to ensure that there is Committee of Nations and international trade process. So there is a separate specific article in the Constitution empowering Parliament through its government to enter into contracts. Because there is power in the Constitution and Parliament can do it, Income Tax Act, which is an act of Parliament, has a provision called Section 90. So Income Tax Act says the central government can enter into an agreement with any other government outside India. What for? Granting reliefs. Then avoiding double taxation, which I'll explain in a minute. 4 important criteria, at least broadly. One is for granting relief, which is A. Avoid double taxation, which is B. C. Exchange of information. And D. For recovery of tax. See, what is this exchange of information? All of you would be very familiar. Last few years, there is so much of debate happening on it. Black money, PMLA, Binomi Act, Black Money Act, all these legislations have come only to unearth our money lying outside India. Suppose you managed to take the money out of India, then it became out of control. We couldn't manage bringing it back. Because nations will say it's like a crime. If you commit it within India and if you can catch hold of the criminal, it's fine. Suppose he finds a way out, then it's not easy to bring him back. Same is the case with monies also. So now exchange of information is happening big time. 126 nations have already signed agreements saying that if you suspect something and write to a nation and say, can you please verify these transactions with these bank accounts in your banks in your country, and we find this to be one which is a colored transaction or a gray transaction, will you help? That nation is under an obligation to help. So from 2011, this is slowly taking a shape, and now it's all fairly well. Still structures are there, still things are happening, that's okay. But essentially we are moving in this direction. Exchange of information is something very, very vital. Now, so for us today, let us confine to B. Avoidance of double taxation. What do you mean by avoidance of double taxation? Let us put in an Indian scenario. All of you are lawyers. You all earn money. So when you earn money, who has to pay income tax? Income tax has to be paid only by the income earner. One who earns income will pay income tax. So what happens in this situation? There are two parties involved, USA and India. So the income earner is in USA. The person spending the money is in India. So if you apply the raw logic, the USA company can come and do business in India, take the money, go back to USA and pay tax in USA. It's possible. That's how it has to work, because one who earns income should pay tax. But if that is the scenario, what happens to India? After all, India has been the source for him to get the income. So the question would arise, who can tax, whether USA or India, or whether both can tax? So these things started to happen when international business started to grow big time. When it started to go big time, this resulted in, I'll come to 92 a little later. This, you can park this, you can have it in your mind. There is a provision called 92. I'll come to it a little later. Then came the treaties. See, treaty is nothing. I'll tell you very clearly. Treaty is nothing. It is a statutory contract, a sovereign contract entered between nations, agreeing to do a stipulated issues. Who will tax what and for what purposes? That's all. That is all. To understand it in a very simple sense. So, how does this happen between treaty? Why treaty? There are two aspects which you should bear it in mind. One is called resident taxation. Another is called source taxation. What do you mean by resident taxation? Microsoft earning money from India will be a resident in America. Therefore, whether America should tax it, because he is a resident of USA. Vice versa, come on, he might have earned money, he might be an American entity, but he's earning money only in my country because of my source. He has come here. Therefore, the source of income is India. And consequently, it can be taxed only by India. So the same transaction, America can say, I will tax it because the corporate entity is a resident of US. India can say, no, I will tax the same transaction in India because India has given the source of income. So what happens? The same $100 out of a transaction can be taxed by both countries because they have sovereign rights. So to avoid that, we enter into a treaty. Simple. If this much of understanding at this point of time should be enough. So 2-3 things are very critical for a treaty. Once you come into a treaty, you will decide, I'm going to show the next or 2 slides later, you will decide what are all the components that is available for taxation. Then you will decide who will tax and which. And 3, you will say, once tax has been paid in one country, you should give a credit in the other country, so that What do you mean by credit? Let us take our own case. You are all lawyers. When you raise a bill, say 1 lakh to a client, then the client will deduct TDS of 10,000 rupees and then issue a check for 90,000 rupees. It happens for all of us. So when you deposit that 90,000 rupees, somebody has already paid 10,000 rupees tax on your behalf. He will issue you what is called the Form 26AS. You will go and give it to your auditor. The auditor will say, you will have to pay 14,000 rupees as tax. 10,000 rupees has already been paid. So it is enough if you pay 4,000 rupees from your pocket using this certificate. So this is called the credit mechanism. Same thing happens globally. So in essence, see, India is the only country where you have a tax deduction at source for the domestic transaction. Nowhere in the world it has. You will have a deduction or a withholding only in an international transaction. Now, that is why if you have seen in this 20 lakh crore package, they have said that whatever TDS we have given, we will now confine it to 75%. Suppose you as a lawyer, our client can withhold 10%. Now the client will withhold 7.5%. So 2,500 rupees will be available for consumption in the market till such time you file your tax return and then pay the tax. So this is a small adjustment given as a part of the relief package. Otherwise, this happens only between nations. So this is how treaty is entered into. Now, when you enter into a treaty, these are the factors which each treaty country will try to figure it out. What are the economic factors and rights available to the nation? Who is strong between the two? A developed nation will try to see if it has, for example, US is a developed nation, but it has an interest in India. India is a big market for US. So it will say, I'll give you the following benefits. I'll still do business with you. So the treaty with US will be much softer. Suppose we go to a country in Europe or a country like Japan, where they may not need us much, but we need them more. There, if you see the treaty on the very same issues, their bargaining power will be more. So it happens naturally that it is like a simple contract as you and I enter on different dates for different transactions. What is the nature? Whoever has a better bargaining power will ensure that happen. And it has bargaining power, it has diplomacy, it has compulsions. All these things together will constitute drafting a treaty. So, ease of applying the established rules, income apportionment, how should we, suppose they want to say, let's jointly tax, or any one of them can tax at the country level, but you should apportion this much to me. I also need a share there. All these combinations can happen. This is not very important. Next we go. Now, what are the heads of income which somebody will be interested to capitalize, interested to virtually deal with? These are the broad heads which one should be familiar to understand. The normal head of business will be business profits. By doing a business, you earn an income, and after deducting the expenditure, there is a profit. Then that is called as business profit. See, the general treaty law recommends business profits cannot be taxed by the source country. What do you mean by that? See, a branded company in USA sells goods to India. India is exporting those goods. he earns money through that merchandise and America gets the money. Now, treaty law says that kind of a regular business transaction cannot be taxed by India because it is buying the goods. That will be taxed only by the country where he is a resident. But there is an exception to that. The same treaty would say, suppose that entity in US or in London or in Japan has, which we saw the such structures, a subsidiary or a branch, not a subsidiary, a branch or a joint venturer or an agent, a dependent agent. If such a person is going to work in Indian soil on behalf of that company and then encourage business to happen, then the law says the proportionate income earned by that representative in India has to be taxed only in India. This is a very huge area because every government will try to say in some way or the other, there is a permanent establishment, you have to appropriate money. Because business profits otherwise cannot be taxed by India, that's the source country. So this is as far as business profit is concerned. As far as loans and dividends are concerned, only the source country can tax. Why? Somebody puts money into India and it earns interest. See, he gives a debt. See, the difference between loan and dividend is what? Loans earn interest. Equity earns dividend. So, any partner who comes to invest money, if he wants to invest carefully, he is only an investor as a vehicle to collect interest. He will only lend money. He will say, I'm not concerned about I don't want to be a participant to your business. I will only lend, I'm a lender, give me interest. But if he has business acumen, then he will say, let me partner and take a portion of equity, 12%, 15%, 20%, whatever is the cap which FDA permits. Then if he puts that equity, equity earns dividend. Now, treaty law says generally both loans and dividends has to be taxed only by the source country because it is India. In India, you invest the money. It is Indian corporate which is buying the loans. Now, come to the next, royalty and fee for technical services. What do you mean by royalty first? I was telling you, if you sell goods, then that is business income, it has to be taxed somewhere. You don't sell goods. You grant a license to manufacture. You grant a copyright license for use and get revenues out of it. So, suppose London has a very good brand and a particular product. See, we are all familiar with Apple's, Microsoft's, Ray-Bans, all these brand names, all of us are familiar. When it comes to eating houses, McDonald's, all this. Suppose McDonald's wants to give its licensed interest, how to put the shop, how to prepare the dough, how to do the things to an Indian entity as a franchisee. Then that Indian entity has to pay a fee, a license fee for using that, because otherwise he can't authorize, he is not authorized to use McDonald's business secrets. That money, when the Indian entity pays to McDonald's, it becomes royalty. That is taxable in India. Because like a loan, like a dividend, this is also an asset used in India and the income earned out of India. Same is the case of fee for technical services. Somebody comes and renders a service. Then Income Tax Act says, 917 of the Indian Income Tax Act says, tax has to be paid in India. But there, the treaty law is slightly favorable. It says, when it comes to fee for technical services, unless you make the technology available to the Indian, it need not be taxed in India. If you come on only service, take, for example, blood samples. We don't have a testing laboratory in India. So this blood is, sample is sent abroad, tested, and then comes back. Can you put them under FTS? No, you cannot put them under FTS. Whereas that company gives the model to India for a particular hospital to create that facility and charges, it has to pay. India has to pay. So this is how it happens. Now the next head is capital gains. All of us know what do you mean by capital gains. When you buy an asset, say at 1 crore, and sell the assets at 2 crore, after some time, it appreciates. The asset could be stocks, the asset could be property, anything. That 1 crore gain in your hands will be taxed again as capital gains. This is what Indian law says. So international law says, what do you do with capital gains? It says, we will not be dealing capital gains as part of treaty. You can govern it with your local laws. That is how tax havens get created all over the world. It's a very different subject. Vodafone judgment is only on this point. That will itself take 2-3 hours to take. So we'll deal with it some other time when we get the occasion to speak. But essentially speaking, capital gains is, see, this is a simple one economic idea. You have it in your mind for the time being. That is enough. What do you mean by capital gains? See, as I said, 1 crore of investment becomes 2 crore, and when I sell that investment, I have to pay, if it is in India, 20% tax, which means 40 lakhs will go as a tax. Whereas in an international scenario, if you have a structured investment through a particular desired countries, which is permissible, legally, legitimately permissible, it has been tested before the Supreme Court and validated also. This 40 lakhs, you need not pay as a capital gains. Why? Because the idea is this 40 lakhs should again roll and rotate and circulate within the same business. So you get an asset, an investment, without having to pay a tax on that purchase. So this is the broad scenario at a global level. So these are the 4-5 broad areas where each country will decide between themselves what sort of a treatment should we give it to them. Now we come to withholding taxes. What do you mean by withholding taxes? As I told you some time back, it is the responsibility of the person who earns the income to pay. But international taxation works the opposite direction. For example, if it is a business income, McDonald's will pay tax in its country. But if it is not a business income, it is a dividend income or an interest income, then India has to tax it. So what does India do? It says, I don't want to be calling McDonald's all the way. Whoever is a franchisee in India, you will pay the tax on his behalf. Let McDonald's file only a return. So the entire tax which McDonald's has to pay to India, it collects it from the franchisee in India at the time of his making the payment to McDonald's. He will withhold 10% is the tax. So he is paying a royalty fee of say 1 crore. When he cuts the check for 1 crore, he will remit 10 lakhs to the government and give 90 lakhs to McDonald's. And now McDonald's will file a formal return saying this is that, because why McDonald's has to file a return? McDonald's will do with 10 franchises in India. So all the 10 will individually pay in their respective circle. One will pay in Bangalore, one will pay in Calcutta, one will pay in Delhi. So McDonald will file one return saying, I have 10 franchisees. All the 10 franchisees have paid 10 lakhs. I have earned 10 crores out of India. 1 crore has already been taxed in India. This is my return. This is what is called as the withholding tax principle. Now, there are subsidiary concepts. These 4 are the main concepts, as I told you: business structure, how to do business, favorable condition, business structure, tax treaty, and withholding. This is the basic principle. Then we slowly get into, I'll just put only the few ideas in your mind today, because it's maybe tough and dry to straight away bolster you with a lot of information. I'll just give you briefly some idea, so that, because I hail from Madurai, I was very, in fact, Srini was saying, is it not a topic that not so relevant to Madurai? I said, it's not a question of relevant or not relevant. I hail from Madurai and I want my Madurai Makkal to know something about it. Let them have an idea. And therefore, Srini said, that's a good idea, then we'll do it. So that is why I volunteered to speak on this subject, because I want my Madurai Makkal to know something about international taxation. You should not be left.
Venkataraman, unless you do this, we may not be exposed to this topic. Right?
No, that's why it's my duty. Whatever little I have learned, I've come from Madurai. I want to give it back to my people. Therefore, with that purpose, I thought I will share a few ideas about what is this law all about. So, permanent establishment is something very interesting, very, very interesting subject. What do you mean by, as I told you, when a business profit is earned from outside the country, it cannot be taxed by India. But somebody, there is an agent, there is an office, there is a shed, there is a workshop, there is a branch, then whatever work that branch has done in India, to that extent, that branch will have to pay tax in India. But this is very simple to understand, but much of the disputes arise only in this area. What will happen? It is like the camel and the tent. The camel would have put only the nose first. So India will say, no, I don't see the nose. I see the whole camel only in India. The moment they find out a PE in India, it is a tendency of a tax authority to bring the entire transaction, 70% of it, 80% of it, to tax. So PE is a highly litigious area. And therefore, they have framed some ground rules. How to handle PE, how to identify PE. In fact, this has moved into a better level of BEPS, BEPS. I'll deal all that at a later point of time. But for you to understand the basics, so permanent establishment, whether there is a permanent establishment there or not, has always been a big question. They will say, suppose somebody keeps a machine through which a gateway connection is given. The machine becomes a permanent establishment. Don't think permanent establishment can mean only be the human agency. Anything which has a connect to the Indian territory, that connection and income attributable to that connection will always be taxed in India. This is the essence of permanent establishment. As I said, 90 days. If you are there for some treaty say, if you are there for 90 days presence, 183 days presence, then staff is, see, it sends a managing director, then 2 officials. Then they will say, they are not individuals. They are not working in their own company in here. If it is a subsidiary, what happens? The law is different. If it is a branch, what happens? Law is different. If both of them don't exist in this form, they exist as individuals, and then they have only one, say, resident office, and then they work, how it becomes a permanent. All these will go into a huge area of discussion. But what you need to carry in your mind is, if there is a permanent establishment in India in some form or the other, which can be man, machine, manpower, anything, to that extent, tax has to be paid. Then Few other subjects I'll deal for another 5-10 minutes and then take questions if any. Yeah, same. See, place of management. This is a very, very, very interesting subject. It is like our corporate wheel. See, somebody will establish a branch here or even a subsidiary here. You all of us know under the Companies Act, a holding company and a subsidiary company are completely different. So it establishes a subsidiary here. Or let us do the reverse. There is an Indian MNC which has a holding structure here and has a subsidiary structure, say, in Netherlands. Now, it is not enough if you have only a structure there. It's not like our Burma Bazaar or in our Madurai near that Tapakulam. There's one like chain stores, 10 by 10. It's not like that. If you hold a structure, that structure should have its own existence. Suppose you go and open a subsidiary in Netherlands and sit in India and take all the decisions for them. That's what is called, a poem is called place of effective management. What are the components of effective management? Decision-making test, necessity test, dominant test, and the substance test. If the inquiry ultimately leads to a conclusion that this is a facade, actually it is only India which is operating, then the entire income earned in Netherlands by the subsidiary can be taxed in India. So it is not enough if you create a structure. The structure should be capable of operating on its own. And this is what is the test they apply. Now, when a businessman comes into India, or we go out of India to do something else, these are all the natures of transaction. When you want to grow in large scales, mergers and acquisitions and amalgamations, all this you would have heard it many times. You would have seen it in the paper. M&A, it's a great M&A law firm. What is that M&A law firm? See, it happens broadly in two ways, either as amalgamation or as acquisitions. An amalgamation happens either by merging two entities or by demerging the existing entity into two or more. For business, suppose a particular company has 3 divisions, division A, division B, division C. Somebody wants A alone, then A will be taken and then merged with another entity. That company itself thinks, if you run it as one entity, the losses of B is being loaded into A and A is slowly coming down. We should allow A to be healthy. So ampute A. So it can demerge A separately. So these are all what is called as amalgamations. When you amalgamate to a demerger or a merger, it is the corporate entity that is amalgamated, lock, stock and barrel. The company shares gets transferred. But some may think, let us not do that. Let us go for an acquisition of their assets and stock purchase. Let us become a major shareholder in that company. Then you go to this stock purchase. Then they say some company is not doing well. There's no point in acquiring the company, but it has very good assets. Go and purchase only the asset. There is a taxing consequence for everything. See, in tax law, unless you understand the commercial transaction correctly, you will not be able to decide which tax apply to what transaction, especially in a global scale. Therefore, this merger, demerger, asset purchase and stock purchase becomes a very important criteria. Similarly, international mobility. What do you mean by cross-border mobility? where you need laborers. We are all now struggling how to handle our migrant laborers within the country. This is all to deal with laborers and also semi-management, down management, middle management, upper management. They'll all be locating from one country to another country. Some country will have social security. Some country will not have social security. So when mobility moves from one place to another place, there is a law. It is not only labor law. Mobility has huge tax implication when it comes to international taxation. Issues of immigration, issues of employment, compensation, and the social and income tax structure. Whether you should compensate, for example, it can be in the form of mere manpower. That's one form of mobility. It can be in the form of transferring him to the subsidiary. If it is manpower, he will be ready because the money will get credited in his country's income. And suppose there's a social security code, it gets credited there. And he'll go back after a while. So he may not come within the PE structure. Nothing gets taxed here. On the other hand, he doesn't come, the mobility is permanent to a structure. He's transferred to the subsidiary company. And the subsidiary company pays all his salaries. Then as an expat, he may have to pay taxes in India. So human capital, human mobility has a huge area of issues coming out of taxes. Like permanent establishment is an issue. Human global ability is also one of the biggest areas of practice in international taxation. And finally, with this, I think it's the last slide. With this, we'll try to close this. As I told you, income tax, global income tax is like a pair of scales. It could be through the source rule or the resident rule, or a combination of both. So these are all the complex matrices which is available between a source rule and a resident rule. They'll always be conflicting in nature. So whenever countries enter into a treaty, they sit, find out, and resolve these gaps so that the resident rule and the source rule at some point of time meet and decide what should be taxed by the resident country, what should be taxed by the source country, what should be taxed and given to the other country, and what is the tax paid should be adjusted. So in paper, it looks like ultimately 100 rupees is taxed in both of the countries and there is a tax credit, but it doesn't happen in reality. It's like a monkey pulling the bread its own way. So each country tries to pull it in its direction. So ultimately, the cost of the transaction income gets inflated to 130 rupees, 140 rupees, 170 rupees instead of the intrinsic 100 rupees. The whole area of international taxation practice is only how to bring down 170 to 100, nearness to 1. This is all the attempt all of us try to do before the courts.
Swaminathan?
In fact, the permanent establishment patti 2 minutes konja sonna better because adula da major issues and other things were there. So I just want to have an explanation on permanent establishment. What is it? Virtually, that will be
like, I'll spend the 2 minutes because see what is permanent establishment is only this. It normally happens when it comes to taxation of business profits, which is outside India as per the treaty. Article 7 says you don't have to tax business profits in India unless otherwise it's a permanent establishment. And Article 5 takes you to what is a permanent establishment. Most of the treaty, it is Article 5 and 7 only. Most of them. So Article 5 tells you what will constitute a permanent establishment. Some unit is working for 6 months. India, Japan, I think it is 6 months. Some are 9 months. Some are 3 months. Human capital ko solar hai. So then they become a permanent establishment in India. 2, this is the human way. 2, infrastructure. You hire a place. You take a facility to store. The preparatory things goes out of taxation as of now, but BEPS is rethinking about it. And the example, 2 minutes was all right.
Correct.
So now workshop, infrastructure, if you try to use, then that becomes a permanent establishment. 3, equipments. In telecom industry and all, you come and put a gateway. Now, that gateway, without that gateway being installed in India, business cannot happen. So they will say, this gateway being in Indian soil, I will call it a permanent establishment and I'll attribute an income to that. Now 4, is physical. Now virtual. So virtual, should you go by, suppose it is television, should you go by teleprints? Then it goes to the consumer. Should you go to the channel partner who is having his website, who may have it even outside the country? BEPS is all dealing only about virtual. We are all talking about virtual courts. Virtual is going to be the plus and virtual is going to be the minus in the future. So each one, at the bottom line ultimately, Swami, is intrinsically, is there anything happening in India where you can investigate and find out through the business? If something happens in India, to that extent, India should be allowed to tax. நீங்க என்ன பண்றீங்க அந்த உண்மையை சொல்லிடுறேன். அதுதான் அந்த கேமல் மூக்கு நுழைக்கிறதுன்னு சொன்னேன். கண்டுபிடிப்பீங்க, ஒரு மெஷின் இருக்குன்னு கண்டுபிடிச்சு மொத்த பிசினஸையும் நான் இந்தியால தான் வரி போடுவேன்னு சொல்லிட்டு இருக்கீங்க. That's the problem. உடனே என்ன ஆயிடும், உடனே அப்போர்ஷன்மெண்ட்ங்கிற தியரிக்கு வருவீங்க. உடனே சுவாமிநாதன் will say, Lord, I want to be very fair. Let it not be 100%, let it be 70%. But ஆனா 7% கூட அதோட வேல்யூ இருக்காது இந்தியால. So this is where arbitrariness happens. ஆனா இத ட்ரீட்டி மூலம் சால்வ் பண்ண முடியாது. They all say you are ultimately governed by a domestic law because permanent establishment வந்துருச்சுனா sovereign territory. International territory cannot operate. So this is one huge area giving rise, அது balloon மாதிரி அப்படியே expand ஆகிட்டே போகும். It is pure question of fact. Then you can come to the PE rules and then apply the rules proportionally. Am I clear up to this, Swaminathan?
Absolutely, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks.
Thank you, Venkataraman. I think we are coming to the end of this session. To be frank with you, a new subject, it is very difficult to make people to understand. But the way in which you have put forth the matter and the lucidity you have done, as usual, it is something unique to you. And it's not something new. Anyway, a subject which is something new, and people are very much a little bit of a kind of an aversion is there. And already you made it a point in GST in making people to come to listen to you. It's a wonderful job. I thank you very much for the time and energy you have spent.
Thank you so much to each one of you. Thanks, Shini, personally.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.